Myanmar's neighbours in Southeast Asia have expressed serious concern over the situation. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, says political stability is essential to peace. Member states have been closely following developments. ASEAN says it is pushing for dialogue, reconciliation and return to normal following the will and interests of the people of Myanmar. Governments in the region have also had their say. Some have described the military takeover as an internal matter, with Cambodia's Prime Minister and Thai Prime Minister refusing to comment further. Indonesia is urging all parties to adhere to democratic principles and to observe the ASEAN Charter. Malaysia's opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim has called for the immediate release of political leaders and a return to the rule of law. Singapore has expressed a grave concern. The Foreign Affairs Ministry hopes all parties will exercise restraint, maintain dialogue and work towards a positive and peaceful outcome. The ministry has also advised Singaporeans in Myanmar to remain vigilant and to follow the advice of local authorities. Now, for more reaction in the region, May Wong joins us live from Bangkok. Now, May, you're in neighbouring Thailand where things have been heating up. There have been clashes between police and protesters. Tell us more.
Well, I'm right here almost in front of the Myanmar embassy. This is about 200 to 300 meters away from the Myanmar embassy. And as you can see right now here in Bangkok, you still have a barricade of police officers in full riot gear holding up the police shields as well as having batons. And that's because just a while ago, they actually clashed with the anti-government protesters. Now, remember here, today there were two groups of people who actually gathered in front of the Myanmar embassy. One group was the Myanmar citizens working and living in Thailand. They were in front of the embassy to protest against the military coup in Thailand. And obviously on the other side as well, you've got the anti-government protesters from Thailand who came out to support, to say that they are also rejecting this kind of a military coup, not just in Thailand, but also in the regional countries. And that's the reason why the anti-government protesters of Thailand came out to show solidarity with the Myanmar citizens and to reject any possibilities of coup happening in any part of this region. But obviously, something happened in terms of witnesses also were telling us to say that there was a slight altercation simply because the police started to come in later on, despite it being a rather peaceful protest, and started to push the protesters back. And that is when the whole clash began in terms of the police starting to use force, and they were using batons as well to hit out at the anti-government protesters. Now, that's exactly what some of the people gathered actually remembered and recounted. And that's the reason why it has led to this particular stage where now the police officers are still closing off this road leading to the Myanmar embassy just about 200 to 300 meters away, continuing to gather evidence of what actually happened. Along the way, as I came from the Myanmar embassy, I noticed that there were paints being splashed on the floor, that people were using the ordinary materials of the traffic cones, for example, as well as the barricades along the road to throw at the police officers. And that's the reason why now the police are going to be launching an investigation. But obviously, in the minds of many people, both the Myanmar citizens here as well as the Thailand anti-government protesters are asking, why did the police need to take such excessive actions in their opinion? And that is why it has come to this stage where unfortunately it may have hijacked the real objective of actually denying and rejecting the military coup that's happening in Myanmar.
May, reaction across Southeast Asia has been varied and in some parts somewhat muted, like in Cambodia and Thailand where you are.
Exactly right. You mentioned earlier about how Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen has mentioned that this is an internal domestic affair. Now remember here that many of the ASEAN member nations really tried to step back and not to interfere, so to speak, in the domestic issues of every of the ASEAN member nations. There are 10 ASEAN member nations, obviously, and many of these nations refuse to be drawn into all these domestic internal affairs simply because they say that all of these governments need to sort it out themselves. But obviously one underlying message is they really want to see dialogue, communication happening. They want to see that the will of the people in Myanmar are being enforced and also being carried out. And they also emphasize the fact that a legitimate government needs to be restored over in Myanmar. They obviously disagree with any kind of violence or any kind of military coup taking over because that is not what the people voted for back in November. And that's the reason why the regional governments are calling for calm. They're asking for the Myanmar military as well as the government or whoever is running the country right now in Myanmar to calm down and also to think this through very carefully, because whatever happens in Myanmar, whatever happens in any of the any of the ASEAN member nations, that will inevitably affect the entire ASEAN region. And so you can just imagine they have put out a rather muted statement, to be honest, but background of it all is the fact that you probably can imagine that they're making calls and speaking to the military chief, hoping to get in touch with him and asking him to think this through very carefully, because these are lives at stake. These are systems, democratic systems in place, which he is pretty much fundamentally destroying at this point with the military coup. Remember, it's not just the ASEAN member nations that are concerned. You've got the United States, the UN as well as European Union. They have all come out strongly to condemn the actions that's happening over in Myanmar right now, and they're calling for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi as well as key administration ministers who have been detained by the military. And they're saying that only with dialogue, only with communication and with cool-headed treatment to this entire situation will these events somewhat be able to be restored or bring calm to this country and the region.
All right, many thanks for that. May Wong speaking to us from Bangkok.